Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
This episode will be the second of our Write Like episodes.
In these episodes, we'll be talking about famous and infamous writers, plus tackling prompts in their honour.
Style, structure, or tone, the intention is to take our styles and see what happens when we try and make it feel like the greats.
According to William F. Buckley, today's author is one you do not read, but reread.
British novelist who started writing to amuse herself and has now amused most of the known world. Jane Austen.
Jane Austen. Very impressive figure.
Sort of opposite end of the spectrum from where we were last time with Hunter S.
Bit.
Thompson.
Yeah. She's, undoubtedly a huge influence for many, many reasons, including...
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's too long a list, isn't it? But phenomenal trying to get to grips with the way that she wrote.
Oh, Christ, yeah. It's such a strange... I found a fantastic article on, about if you're trying to emulate Jane Austen, the things that people get wrong when they're trying to do it. And there was a whole thing on the correct use of the term visit. Like, to visit.
to visit
apparently,
someone. Yeah.
A lot of it had to be explained, I think it was specifically to a lot of Americans, that if you say, I'm going to visit someone, that can be, if you're going for a weekend, for a month, that's all one visit. And if you were then going to, while there, go into the sitting room for a few hours with the aunt, you wouldn't say, I'm going to visit the sitting room. You'd say, I'm going to the sitting room. And there was apparently that's a huge sticking point for people trying to emulate Jane Austen, especially people who aren't British, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Wouldn't you say in that scenario, I'm going to visit with aunt? I think that would be the right usage, wouldn't it?
I guess you could, but it seems like an odd, if you've already said that you are visiting with your aunt and uncle, to then further visit with your aunt is, oh man, the English language is wild. It does all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah, and it's all a bit of a comedy of manners, or at least they often are branded as such. These Austen novels. Do you know that she actually wasn't famous during her lifetime? I suspect you probably already know this, but it was all anonymously published.
Yeah,
which is a very strange situation. Like we were talking about how Hunter S. Thompson's path into writing and path to greatness or infamy couldn't really happen now. I think a similar thing would be the case for Jane Austen.
Yeah.
She has to come from money. She has to be independent of this particular profession, despite dominating it and establishing new genres. Also like a lot of work after it came out after her death, because she died quite young. Some sort of
41
cancer.
She was.
41 was it? Oh Christ!
41, which is over. I've got some stats. It was 1817.
So we're talking prime Regency.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I forget which George that is, but it's in the Georgian period and in the Regency, because I think the Regency ended in the 20s, didn't it? Oh well, if anyone's watched Bridgerton, you probably know what we're talking about when we say Regency.
I tell you what, it was really difficult, having watched Bridgerton, not to put absolutely tons of oral sex in this.
Or like really bad boxing, where the pretty guy never gets actually hurt despite being punched in the face repeatedly.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. I did enjoy that show, but it reminded me a lot of weirdly of being a kid, because I was really into Regency stuff when I was very, very young.
Well, you like a period piece, don't you?
I love it, yeah, but it comes from Jane Austen. It comes from Pride and Prejudice, the big 90s BBC version, and had it on a VHS tape, and I would come back from school, so sort of probably like maybe 6-7 years old maybe, and I would put it on to watch it, and I would quote it at people, and adults thought it was hilarious, so I kept on doing it because you get positive reinforcement.
Yeah. At the same age, my favourite film was Amadeus, so we're both
there you go.
both unusual kids.
That's way weirder. I think Pride and Prejudice is far more accessible for a child. Amadeus has like strong tones of betrayal and madness.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I thought it was brilliant. I liked that and Jurassic Park. They were
yeah,
my
cool.
they were my two
You don't want
faves.
to get those two things mixed up, really.
You never
Because
know.
Salieri is a Stegosaurus.
I made you extinct, Herr Mozart.
um,
The
yeah,
I've got a fun fact about the Pride and Prejudice TV stuff.
go on.
The TV stuff and the movies all use the same garden, and it's the garden at Pinewood Film Studios. And there's a bridge there that they use in all of them, and that bit of the garden doesn't ever get changed, and it's become so synonymous with those stories that it's just kept in that way now at the studio.
Yeah, is it the one that you see in Notting Hill when they're filming a period piece?
Yes, I think so.
That would make sense. I wonder which house they used that bit of the garden for in the BBC one, because I think the house at Eastbourne in that BBC one is possibly it's sorry, not Eastbourne, Longbourn is a place, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's but in terms of the writing, I didn't really come to Jane Austen until a lot later. Largely because it's pretty impenetrable, I would say. Even as like a sort of late
Yes.
teenager, I was still a bit like, what the fuck? It works because the speech is very rapid. You know, I was thinking about Quentin Tarantino when I was rereading it earlier because he gets praised for the same thing. This kind of like flowing, deliciously, immediately characterized speech. That Jane Austen does. It's in a very different vernacular. That's the main difference. I assume someone somewhere has made that comparison before, but it sort of helped me to think about it a bit more in that context. But it's very strange trying to emulate it because there's lots of strange techniques being used and outmoded speech patterns and all that jazz. How did you find it?
It was unusual. Do you know, there's something about it which is that every sentence could be shorter than it is, but there's like a degree of elegance to the way that they're drawn out.
Mm.
If you know, like, you wouldn't say, I'm going to the kitchen. Say, I'm taking it upon myself to travel from here to the kitchen. It's, and it sounds silly, but that is exactly what it's like. Like, everything has an air of importance to it. But I think that's what makes the work so interesting, is the things that are so horrendously mundane, like trying to find a husband, become the most important thing in the world through the way the story's told.
Mm. She definitely understood people
Yes.
in a way that allowed, because it's not like, you know how like Dickens satire and that kind of thing is all, it's quite harsh on the nose. She sometimes somehow feels like she loves her characters despite taking the piss out of them, which is
Yeah.
a nice thing to be able to do, I think. Yeah.
You're not wrong there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we should probably tell some stories. So, dear friend, the prompt is Fragment this week, and it falls upon oneself to urge you to speak upon the matter.
So I shall. Fragment. It is often the case, whereupon my mother happens upon the evidence of any misdeed, that her ire is directed towards myself. Indeed, it may be fairly noted that I have, in my time, been the cause of several mishaps which my mother would deem unseemly. It was with such thoughts that I discovered a shard of china in our drawing-room, perchance, as it pricked me when I sat upon it. No one was about to hear my cry, which was fortunate, as then the blame would have fallen immediately into my lap. I turned the fragment this way and that between my fingers, looking for any clues. I fancied myself something of a detective, as I had, not 2 summers hence, deduced who was stealing biscuits from the tin in the pantry. Mother had, in immediacy, claimed it was I who snacked surreptitiously. I do not seize my confectionaries by the dead of night. It would be improper to do so. In the end, a trail of crumbs, had they been but bread, reader, this would be an anecdote too perfect, led me to Mother's West Highland Terrier, Alfonso. The clever chap, having a stout temperament and a keen nose, had discovered that the biscuits could be taken with a little effort on his part, and done so. I applauded his trickery and tenacity. To wend your way into a biscuit receptacle is no mean feat without the use of digits such as mine, yet the hound had managed it. Promptly it was swept under the carpet, proverbially, of course, and the tin was moved to a higher shelf, where it was safe from snouts. I have, on occasion, taken one biscuit for Alfonso and placed it within his reach. Adventure should be rewarded, and he is a keen adventurer, especially when biscuits are concerned. Mother had yet chided me, whereupon the culprit was discovered. "Did you not watch over him, then?" she had asked. I did not answer, for fear that I would point out that Alfonso was her dog, and ought to be under her surveillance, not mine. "You continue to disappoint me, Esmeralda. Would that you could find yourself with some air of dignity or refinement. As it stands, you are a woman grown, and yet you bear no grace nor wiles. What hope have you of being wed? None. No man desires a woman whose feet fall such as a great army at its march, whose needle remains unthreaded for lack of nimbleness. Even with beauty so great as yours, and a bosom soon to blossom, you are a cause lost." I had retreated, then, as I did upon all such occasions. In my chamber I found myself, my cheeks wet with desperate unbidden tears of betrayal. For what to call this act, if not that? Now, in our present day, I find myself once more in that room. My face was not, upon this occasion, twisted into the frightful contortions it required to weep, but instead cast in the furious look of the police captain at his work. I had puzzled over the piece of china for hours now, waiting for the moment my books had promised me. It seemed not with all of Scotland Yard at my back could I have uncovered more clues than I had already. It was curved, this fragment, and a little silver clung around its edge. The finest china we had in this house, then, I daren't say. In a moment of clarity, I placed my tongue gently upon the inside of the curve. There it was, so subtle as to vanish beyond the reckoning of the eye, but to my senses, heightened as they were by the thrill of the chase, I did detect upon it the faintest taste of tea. Father and both of my brothers had left before the rise of the day's sun, far too early to take tea, much less from the finest china. Mother was a woman of less pressing appointment, and perhaps could have spent the early hours sipping. Then again, all within the home were partial to tea. From father at his loftiest to the lowest of the scullery maids, I knew that all herein were enjoyers of such a brew. But who among them would dare to use so precious a receptacle? Perhaps it was this indiscretion, this flagrant flaunting of the rules, that had led to a moment's panic. Some foolish boy, thirsty from his time in the stables, had drunk from the first cup he could find. Then, his ears pricking, he had heard the footsteps of Mother approaching. In a fit of panic, the cup had flown from his hands, making haste towards the unforgiving wood of the floor. In a panic he had gathered up what he could, before fleeing the scene. Yes, it made perfect sense. But where to start? I realized, with a quickening of thought I had not come to suspect from myself, that I must first to Mother. If I could present my evidence before a defence could be mounted, then she would be unable to blame me, for a culprit was already found. Although this had not mattered in the case of Alfonso, I had no responsibility in keeping a close eye on stable boys. My father had in fact taken some effort to keep them separated from me, blossomed as I was into womanhood. Triumphant in action, a battle won ere it could be fought, I marched my way to Mother's rooms. She was not there, but in her place a maid. "Elsbeth!" I cried, in my finest approximation of a constable. "Where is Lady Hannity?" I fixed her with a gaze most powerful, the weight of not only my convictions, but the law behind it. "Your mother is downstairs, ma'am," she said, The light of fear in her eyes. I made note of this. Mayhaps she was in league with the stable boy. Perhaps this web of deceit wove most deep. She was not a woman of ill repute within the home, yet perhaps this made Elspeth the most perfect accomplice. I fled before she could mark any more about me, for I feared I was among spiders. "The kitchens!" her voice called after me, rattling through the hallways as I departed. I dashed down the great staircase in the hall, spying as I did the portraits that lined the walls. I thought on how proud they would be of me, the eyes that stared back. I was defending the home from invaders now. Today it may simply be fine china, but before you know what has come, they will whisk you away to be stolen by stable boys yourself. The idea brought more than a little excitement to me, though in what manner it would not be fitting to mention. I found Mother in the kitchen. She looked appalled. The doors before me had rung against the wall. The echoes of the din still rumbled through the bowels of the kitchen. I brandished the shard of teacup at her. Her face was as still as the stone edifice of our home. I looked at her hands. One was bandaged around the palm. In her fingers were a dozen other shards of cup. She was moving to dispose of them. Caught in the act. I could scarce believe it. "Mother!" I cried. "I have caught you disposing of the evidence of your crime." I slammed the fragment of cup onto the side, whereupon it tinkled. "How do you plead?" I stood proud and firm. Mother seemed to shrink, as a boiled clam within its shell. "For the love of God, Esmeralda, enough, all right, enough of the fancy flights and the silly games. You're 17, for fuck's sake. I was married and pregnant with your brother by this age. Honestly, I don't even know where I went wrong. You're so bloody weird, aren't you? Move out. Get married, please." With her confession thus completed, she slumped forward and began to sob. A dreadful criminal caught in the act. A job well done, I thought to myself. Another crime solved by Esmeralda Hannity. Time to celebrate by giving a biscuit to a dog.
Well. I'm getting the distinct impression that you don't make much of the Regency period.
I'd say I don't really connect with it.
Move out, for fuck's sake. That really strongly reminded me of the Pratchett satire of the young girls at home comedy of manners kind of stuff. In Snuff, when he goes to visit them and he just sort of they're all sitting around doing needlework and he says, "What do you actually do?"
Yeah.
And none of them can answer. They were like, "Well, we're gentlefolk. We're the daughters of a gentleman. We just wait to get married."
Yeah.
And that fulfills you, does it? Had a strong that vibe to it. A fun little twist. I don't think I've ever disliked a character more than this like crazy entitled brat. She's a highly unpleasant individual, isn't she? She doesn't really have many redeeming qualities.
Yeah, I really like that as a concept. I think they, you made a good point about how Austen liked all of her characters, and even when they weren't like good people, they still had sort of human qualities. But this character is definitely a character. There's no much to my shame.
I think even some of the more unrepentant characters like Lady Catherine de Bourgh from Pride and Prejudice is horrible.
Yeah.
But I think she even gets a bit of redemption at the end. Not redemption, but maybe understanding from the third person. Speaking of which, so what led you to do first person out of interest?
Don't know. I think that comes from Bridgerton. Because I like the way that I can't remember what the character's called when the lady who's writing all of the
Lady
I don't,
Farthingale or something.
I don't want to do any Bridgerton spoilers in case anyone goes away and watches it, but
I think that's just what her pen name is.
yeah, but she's writing about what's happening in the upper crust from her perspective, and I actually really jived with that.
Yeah, it works really well as like the way of, in terms of a narrator for your story. It works really well. It had possibly more of like a Charlotte Bronte vibe.
Yeah,
You know,
I know, I can see that.
Where she was like, when she addressed the reader as reader, that reminded me very strongly of the end of Jane Eyre.
Oh, the reader, I married him.
Reader,
yeah.
I married him. Yeah, exactly. Which is not. I mean, that's still a very good comparison, isn't it? It's still very talented author.
With the wrong letter of the alphabet.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed it. It felt very much. It had a really good sense of place. I liked it as like it's almost one of those ones that's quite difficult to take in because it's so unpleasant, isn't it?
Yeah.
You managed to nail how unpleasant it would be to be around someone like that, talking like that all the time. You know, like unrelenting, with nothing really to say and just making up flights of fancy.
Yeah.
Oh, it's horrible.
I like reading back now, like sort of going through it and thinking about it in a post-reading situation. So I tried to keep some of my style in there, which is how I ended up with a big punchline at the end. And,
I like that.
But it's almost Roald Dahl. This meeting point between the two.
Maybe I could sort of see that, but I thought it was very you to sort of give that punch at the end with because that twisting punchline was really fun. Like that made the story work.
Yeah.
I think like up until that point, I think it needed something like that to happen in order for it to make sense as a piece, and it did. It did pull together, and it's good to have the sort of the fun poked at it, which is quite Austen-esque. This idea of taking like a ridiculous thing that can happen in society, such as a useless appendage of a daughter, and drilling down into it. I think it steps away from Austen in the narratorial style, and obviously with the swearing and stuff at the end. But then that's fine because we're not. Although the aim is to it's not to ape her perfectly. That's not what we're doing here. It's to sort of take on bits and pieces of that, of their style, structure, or tone, and see what happens when we add that to our style, which is what happened, and we got a good joke, which I think worked really well. I know we don't normally talk about what happens in the story that hasn't been read out yet, but I do something sort of similar. Like I don't stick to the style.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I tell you what, it made me want to rewatch Bridgerton. I did I did get a strong Bridgerton vibe from it, which was really fun.
No cunnilingus though, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
At least you didn't go down on the dog. That was what I was expecting from you, if I'm honest.
That's what you were expecting from me specifically.
Of course I was expecting that from you.
Oh. Part of me thinks I could edit that out because then I wouldn't look terrible, but another part of me thinks I should just leave it in.
I was just thinking, what would be the worst thing that would be very funny but dark at the same time to happen at the end?
I mean, we did have a whole thing about nonces previously with Kira Lee, so I think we've pretty much plumbed the depths, haven't we?
Pretty much.
Speaking of plumbing the depths, that's a horrible way to.
I once encountered someone whose sister would sleep with a dog in a sleeping bag, and it was definitely very weird.
Hold on, that's not the end of that story.
I was asleep on this bloke's sofa after a party, and I woke up, and she was sat on the edge of the sofa with the dog on her lap, petting it and just staring at me. Bear in mind, I was hungover, and it was about 6 a.m. And you sort of wake up because your lizard brain tells you something's wrong.
Yeah.
And it was that woman was creepy as hell, man. So I got strong her vibes off that, which may have been why I reacted to it so strongly. In all fairness, I think you just found a trigger for me. This kind of icky hatred for people like that.
The shagging of the dog was implicit, Ben. It didn't need to be in the text.
Girl.
She's lusting after stable boys.
I didn't think it was going to be the Jane Austen episode that went down a bestiality track, to be honest.
The more refined the work we have to deal with, the more depraved I'm going to become.
The Tiny Bookcase Boys. Yeah, it was pretty good, but they started talking about people fucking dogs in the Regency era, and it got a bit weird.
If you're here because you're an expert on Jane Austen and you found us Googling her, I can only apologise, but also, I mean, you know where the pause button's at. If you're listening on Spotify, there's a brilliant skip forward 15 seconds. Hit that like 9 times and we should be done.
It should be somewhere inside my story at that stage.
Yeah. We'll go on then. That sounds like a cue. Should we have you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Go on, you saucy minx.
I'll take a crack at it.
Direct quote from Jane Austen, that. Go on, you saucy minx.
It's on her epitaph, I think. Fragment. Chapter 1. Travel is best undertaken by the bilious and rugged gentleman to whom it naturally calls. There can be little enough notice taken when such a man braves the wilds of the Congo, or the heights of the Pyrenees, or even, heaven forbid, Yorkshire. Their adventure necessitates a growth in attitude and an expansion of self that can only be regarded as a positive quality. Yet, where those not suited to travel strive for it, they soon find their feet back where they started, and the confusion can take some time to clear from their good name. And so, Mama, I have new boots from Shanghai, a waistcoat from Siam, and a ring from Jaipur. His mother cooed at his news from her cushioned seat. The ring, of course, is spoken for, but I have other gifts for my tour for you and the girls. The gift of your safe return from those wild places shall suffice for myself. They are not altogether wild, Mamma. If anything, I feel the world becomes smaller the more I see of it. Nonsense. And I do wish you'd put that foul thing out. It displaces my nerves and quite overawes the senses. They're quite the rage in France, Mamma. And besides, we're outside. On the veranda is in the house. Put it out, Matthew, I say. Your father would never dream of bringing something so French into the house. Very well, Mamma. But they are originally from the Americas, I believe. Mr. Hardwick leant forwards from the divan and extinguished his cigarette. What of my sisters? I have returned with some resources I intend to put towards an increase in our fortunes. There'll be money for dowries once I settle father's debts. They are in bloom. We have invitations to the Larksley Ball before Christmas, and my intention is for us to rejoin with the London season this year. The girls must be presented to the royal court if we are to have a hope of seeing them married well. I'm glad. It won't do for them to be unattached much longer. Mr. Hardwick smiled at his 3 sisters, who seemingly waited to be asked for their opinion within the drawing room. 2 of them smiled back at him, their countenances diverted from their needlework. The third was staring at the spent cigarette with a queer look upon her face. You've not seen them before, Bridget? Or does the smell offend you as it does Mamma? No, I mean, yes, I have seen them before. I did not know I would like the taste of them on the air. What a peculiar thing to say, Bridget. Though their mother was a woman of mean horizons, she knew instinctively what was proper and when the course of a conversation needed to be corrected. It was this virtue that made her a much discussed figure amongst the neighbouring gentry. Chapter 2. Bridget Hardwick lay alone in her bed. The seasonable chill still clung to the sheets, and her body's warmth pushed back in a vainglorious attempt to make her more comfortable. Though the candles had been snuffed, pale light flicked and illuminated her face. It seemed to shine through the small object she held above herself, as one might a book whilst in bed. Kellogg's cornflakes. The best to you each morning. Bridget smiled as she stared unblinking into the object. That object, shaped irregularly as though it might be sharp, was held carefully in her hands, and through it, Bridget could see something entirely queer. Haven't tried Smirnoff? Where in the world have you been? The woman in the fragment of mirror-like slender object wore clothes unlike anything Bridget or her mother could have ever imagined. Her hair was impossibly tall, and her eyes darkened as though she struck the boards in Drury Lane. The moment was lost as another took its place. Her favourite moment. "Come to where the flavour is. Come to Marlborough country." The crinkled skin around his eyes spoke of hard work in such powerful sun that the brim of his hat could not defeat the glare. The stubble on his jaw would feel terrible, yet good at once. She was sure of that. The pull he took on his cigarette caused the tip to blaze cherry red. Bridget closed her eyes and pressed the small thing to her chest. She knew it would not break. The material was oddly pliant. The fragment was from another place, perhaps even another time, and it had found her. Chapter 3. The ball was enjoyed by all of the Hardwick girls, save one. Their mother, ever attentive, was sure to guide them through their first social gathering, at which no pall hung over them in sun time. Each girl was introduced by their brother to every eligible gentleman in attendance. Under the watchful eye of their mother, they graciously accepted all invitations to dance. Whilst her sisters were pleasantly diverted by the frolicking fete, Bridget found herself unable to take any joy in the features of the men who leveraged her time. The musicians the Larksleys had engaged were serviceable, but Bridget found herself unable to think of anything other than the few small bars of music that played behind the sequences on her fragment. In the carriage on the way home, her sisters prattled on with the various gossip, unaware that their world was impossibly small. Their faces glowed with innocence and ignorance of childhood. Next to them, the glamorous woman with the tall hair seemed like a different species. Their prosaic lives would be lived in nothing more than a bucolic glow. Bridget thought back to finding that shimmering object. It had been on one of her energising walks over the stiles and through the agrarian delights of Kent. The moment she had picked it up, she had felt that it was a part of something larger, like finding a small shard of china might imply the existence of a larger water jug. It had begun to speak to her when Matthew went away with the East India Company. Every night she had felt transported, and found that during her days she wanted nothing more than to return there. That night, as her maid brushed her hair, Bridget resolved to see more. In the dark, her cold sheets flung from her, Bridget held the fragment tightly and waited. She nearly fell asleep before a white-haired man with a moustache and goatee woke her by proclaiming the merits of his chicken. Her heart fluttered with anticipation, and she waited. Then the unmistakable brim of her man's hat came across the surface, and Bridget pulled on the edges of the object, trying to stretch it out. The strange fragment yielded gradually, causing her delicate wrists to shake with the continued effort. With a final yank, she dragged it to a width she could push through, and awkwardly wriggled through the image, and began to feel as though she were falling. Bright beams of light shot through and around her as Bridget was disappeared from her bed. Chapter 4. And cut. Reset to 1. Somebody find out who that ditz is. Jimmy, less 100-yard, more 1,000, okay? The hard floor she had fallen on was covered in cables which wriggled to and from the various large lights and equipment that surrounded a small stage. The glare of them nearly blinded her. "What's your name, hon?" Bridget Hardwick. You're the man." "You bet I am, sweet cheeks. Best close your mouth, darling, before I put my tongue in it." Horrified at his crass language, Bridget spun away from the man she had dearly loved to meet. Her surroundings made no sense to her. Everything looked odd and smelt of her brother's cigarettes. She bumped into a man in a strange suit of clothes, which had been decorated with small vertical stripes. "Jimmy, go lasso some other mare. She's clearly got a job to do." "Thank you, I don't know where here is." The striped man held her by her shoulders in an uncomfortably familiar way as he looked her up and down. "Ah, shit. Did they decide to go Regency for the Braziers? I thought it was medieval. You're on stage 3, honey, but you'll need makeup first. Over there." "I don't understand." Bridget had spotted the fragment near where she had appeared. It had shrunk to its original size, and she felt a small budding growth of hope that she could undo what she had done. Bridget reached for it, but the striped man kept his grip on her. Stage 3, makeup first. Come on, hon, it's not difficult. Bridget wriggled and then stifled a scream. The rough-jawed man they had called Jimmy was walking away, his spurs jingling as he did so. The fragment had cracked under the weight of his boot, and he had carried on his stroll without even looking to see what he'd stepped on. She's hysterical. Let me buy you a drink in my office. It's just over there. Bridget, finally free, stooped and picked up the shards of her fragment. They had no luster to them, and she held them close. Her longing to be elsewhere had transformed into a fear of loss, which shook her shoulders. Yet, as she stared into them, images and sounds from half a dozen places began to appear, including her home, where she saw her brother entertaining guests and laughing. She smiled to see it. Thereafter, Bridget was ever sensible of the warmest gratitude towards the chance of fate that had altered her life, and by bringing her into the times and places she could live, she finally found the adventure she dearly needed. The end.
I got to tell you, man, having chapters in a short story is one of the biggest dick swings I think we've had on this podcast so far.
Well, she often had very short chapters.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd throw that in there.
Emulate, yeah, it did it.
Yeah.
Like it felt like I mean, we'll get to the sci-fi element in a minute. First things first, I know you say you don't write jokes and that you struggle with it, but I laughed hysterically at something so French. That was brilliant. I wrote that down. I was enjoying it so much.
I think there were a few more jokes in that one than my normal one. There was something about deliberately trying to write Jane Austen's irony that led to some humour, I think.
The man with the white goatee proclaiming the quality of his chicken was good. So I know it was all of their surname, but Mr. Hardwick does sound like a knob gag.
It does sound like a knob gag, doesn't it? Yeah.
Is that because it is one?
No.
No. No. The firm rod, Mr. Firm Rod.
Matty Hardwick.
Ah, Mr. Engorged Cock. So nice to see you.
Mrs. Engorged Cock. So nice to see you as well.
I see you're in full bloom. You're with child once again. Oh, yes, right. Sci-fi element. Where the fuck did the idea for that come from?
I don't know. I think I'd use portals quite a lot in my short stories. We've seen it a few times. Like, I think if anyone's devoutly been listening to my stories, this probably is maybe the 4th or 5th time I've used some kind of portal. It's an interesting idea. I love putting that kind of thing into stories.
Yeah.
Especially when it's got like a tactile element to it, where like I forget what the prompt was, but there was one where I wrote a story about a like an evil like fairy elf dude trying to get home, and he caused all manner of mischief in Civil War England.
Oh, that was Crossroads, wasn't it?
Crossroads, yeah, exactly, yeah. And he had to force his way through a tree that he had planted on the corpse, yeah. So I think it just comes up in my head quite a lot. Possibly from exposure to C.S. Lewis, Narnia, when I was a kid.
Yeah. It's like explicitly going, initially at least, to what appears to be the backlot of an early Hollywood studio is fascinating. And I can see why, because you have a big love for film, and specifically Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I know has been knocking around in your brain for about 2 years now. Whenever it came out?
Yeah, from whenever it came out. Yeah, I think it's it wasn't actually explicitly Hollywood. I think I was aiming for like more like a commercial shoot, so it could have been anywhere really. It could have been New York, it could have been LA. But it was deliberately like a tiny little set.
Yeah.
The intention, thrown together with the intention of just putting together a very short trailer.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
some kind of magic thing here, isn't there, about like a tiny world created going through a lens and being captured, and there's there is something inherently magical about filming anything that does work well in stories as well. Even if that wasn't the intention here, there are a lot of parallels that can be drawn.
Quite possibly, yeah. This idea of displacing a character like this, it's sort of it's a bit of a similar take to the one that you took actually, where we take, a well-to-do woman or
Yes.
young woman from this period that's reliant on other people and kind of shock them.
Yeah.
That happened in both. Also, there was a sliver of China in mine as well, which actually wasn't
Yes.
the fragment. It was like it was a simile, wasn't
Part
it?
of a jug. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But the things that I was keen to do were untagged speech.
Hmm.
So on the page, and you may have noticed when I was reading it out, it never says "Mother said," "Matthew said."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There's no tags. It just happens, and you have to figure it out. Which means that the characters have to jump off the page a little bit. So I was particularly trying to do that in chapter 1.
It's
Um,
Isn't it interesting that that is also the case with Hunter S. Thompson? That he does a
yeah,
lot of that.
yeah. I mean,
That's
his the other allusion to, well, not allusion, the other connection to Hunter S. Thompson is this idea of like free indirect speech.
yeah,
He's a bit more like stream of consciousness,
yeah,
but the way that, at least I don't think she did it in Pride and Prejudice, but I think she did it in Sense and Sensibility. But Jane Austen, writing in the third person, but then putting things in that are the character talking
yeah.
in the narration, or like tilted from the narration. It's a powerful tool, and it was an early tool at the time. She's a bit of a pioneer for it. So that happens a fair bit inside this story as well. There's a few moments where the narration begins to take on that kind of aspect. It also gradually becomes more and more modern between as the chapters go along.
Yeah.
Not just in the way that she is traveling on her story, but also like from the way that I wrote it. Um, until you get to the end, which I kept as Jane Austen-y as possible. Do you want to guess how this story originally ended when I wrote it the first time?
Was she committed?
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
she was sexually assaulted by that dude in that office, and then committed as a nutter.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, yeah,
And then you
um,
realise that you were writing a Jane Austen story, not a
yeah,
Ben Holroyd-Dell story, and
exactly. Yeah,
had to change the ending. Did she get back? That's what I was trying to work. Because I thought, because it went very Austen-y at the end, that she had got back and then appreciated it more.
she
Or
has she has the ability to get back because
right.
the one fragment has now turned into many. So the implication, or at least what I was trying to imply, was that those shards will now take her wherever she wants to go. So she's got one that leads back home. She's got others that lead to other times and places that allow her to have
Okay.
that adventure. So it's very much that her happily ever after is being able to go on the journeys and the traveling through space and time with this very strange magical sci-fi object, which is the irony that's set up in the very first paragraph, which talks about how basically only rugged men should travel because,
Suited to travel,
yeah,
yeah.
because that helps them grow and expand their self. Whereas if you're not suited to travel, and the implication is if you're, in this particular case, a woman,
A woman?
then you should stay where you are. Otherwise, you'll fuck yourself up. And that's
I'm
very much
definitely
like.
taking that quote out of context, by the way. I'm putting it all over the internet.
But that's her mother, isn't it? That's her mother in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like I didn't get her voice very correct. I think I did it a bit too like flat. Um, but I think she could have done with the mother's voice from your story, for sure.
Of that
Like,
warbling strangeness.
yeah, yeah, definitely a warbling with a bit more aggression to it, maybe. Um,
I really, really nice foreshadowing with the cigarette. Like it's not over. You can't do it over a long time. It's a short story, but that I didn't know I'd like the smell of them. is a really nice.
Mm.
Because obviously you're thinking, oh, she must have seen someone across a square smoking one or whatever. But
Yeah.
really clever interplay. Yeah, there's a lot to that. I'm unpacking it more and more as we talk. And
I think
well
it has
done.
quite a lot going on. I had to actually try and get the timing right because, in order for his character to make sense, he needed to be able to make money off the East India Company. So I had to go into where they were at historically at this stage. Tell you what, if you want to feel bad about humanity, look into the history of the East India Company. I'll tell you that right fucking now. Um, then, then also like mass-produced cigarettes were only just really becoming a thing in France at this time.
Yeah.
Which
Oh.
I didn't know. I didn't know that about. I just kind of assumed they just sort of popped into existence. I'd literally never given it any thought. But for whatever reason, they started in France, sort of just post Napoleonic, and then
I can
spread everywhere.
see that. They've always been a very smoky nation, haven't they? The French.
Yeah. At least in that, I'm talking about like mainland Europe. Obviously, the history of cigarettes is really, really old in the Americas, which is why he sort of chastises his mother for claiming that they're just French.
Got an interesting sort of smoking fact for you. Do you know the cigarette lighter was about before the box of matches?
Huh. I did not.
So I've just double checked because I know this fact. I thought that might be apocryphal, so
You never know.
I've
It's
looked
always
it up.
difficult, isn't it?
But 1816 was the first lighter,
Huh.
And it was Dobryna's lamp, and it was a highly dangerous cartridge filled with hydrogen and triggered by a platinum catalyst.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like something everyone's got in their pocket, does it?
No.
So when did the
So
mass produced?
match-like chemical reactions began in the 17th century.
Right.
The friction match was not invented until 1827, and the popularized small lighter was created by Zippo in the 1930s.
Yeah. I would have said like 1920s, 1930s for that kind of pocket lighter sort of thing. Fascinating though that the technology was around prior.
Yeah, it's wild.
So he would have Matthew Hardwick would have likely been sparking up those cigarettes with with those fancy new matches.
Yeah, fresh out the pack, my man.
Very cool.
It was a British chemist apparently by the name of John Walker.
It was just like, what are we going to do with all these French cigarettes? We need to light them somehow.
It was God. I don't know much about chemistry, but a combination of antimony sulfide, potassium chlorate, gum, and starch on the end. It's like, imagine having to go through that many steps, to figure it out. Well done, scientists of the past.
He had some kind of transferable knowledge that he had a brainwave. It's always a cool moment, isn't it? Those kind of brainwaves.
What are you trying to say? I don't know shit about shit when it comes to matches. What you saying, bro?
I would say that this was really hard compared to.
I really struggled.
Yeah, compared to Hunter S. Thompson, this was really, really hard. I think because it's a lot more technical. And there is also like a vernacular change, which we're perhaps not as comfortable with because it's not as modern.
I think you slotted into it far better than I did.
I suspect that is just because of my exposure to it.
Yeah. But you seem to ply the language in a way that suited you, whereas for me, it was slipping a lot into my habits, and I think I didn't really do writing like Jane Austen justice. I sort of took inspiration from that period as opposed to her, I'd say, looking at my piece.
But yeah, do you actually get on with this kind of literature? Like, I know I don't read it out of preference. Like, I read it a bit when I was a kid and a bit at university with the Brontes and Jane Austen and others. But I know it's not sort of really necessarily inside your wheelhouse. So what do you make of it when you come to interact with it?
So I read a lot of it at I did Austen, did the Bronte sisters, did Margaret Atwood, all at A level.
Right.
For Americans, that's sort of 17, 18 years old. And it may be the way it was taught. You know, like a lot of people bounce off Shakespeare.
Yes.
And they come out going, oh, I hate it. I hate Shakespeare. It's so boring. And it's because they have it broken down in the wrong way and they're shown it in the wrong way. But I really ricocheted off all of it the first time around. And even the like period films and stuff set in that period, as maybe even just because of that, I find it difficult to watch. It's why I was surprised I enjoyed Bridgerton as much as I did. Because I just get a bit turned off by the Regency thing.
I think one of the things that it does beautifully, which I've come to realize as I've gotten older, and I think it's given me a better appreciation for it, in particular with this, just through the lens of Jane Austen, right? So we're talking like Georgian Regency stuff.
Yeah.
This is Europe at war or just after the war.
Yeah.
It was enormous. The Napoleonic War was enormous. And everything is done with something else happening in the background. Like you've got these little girls getting really excited about going to a dance because there might be some soldiers there in red coats, and they talk about how their red coats make them look so dashing.
Yeah.
But the implication is that those boys have seen cannon fire.
Yeah.
We know about that. The reader would have known about that at the time, but through the lens of these
girls,
these girls, like in particular, like
ignorant,
Lydia,
for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But like in Pride and Prejudice, like Lydia, the youngest, she's just a bit feckless and doesn't get it. But she is like. But you can also see how she's like a ray of life and light for those guys as well. So it sort of swings and roundabouts, and I think it's all handled in a way. I think this is why I was saying, she likes her characters.
Yeah.
I think that's where it comes across, and being able to have a big thing in the background which provides context to everything that happens. So all of a sudden, going to a ball sort of does feel quite important because of how awful everything else is. I think that's something that's a bit transcendent of time periods.
Yeah.
Because I think that kind of stuff matters. Like now, again, with the backdrop of the pandemic, I think it mattered during the Iraq War and 9/11. Everything, like any big negative things that happen to humanity, being able to do positive stuff that's happy.
I mean, like being able to meet up for a beer now during a global pandemic. That's the same thing, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, and making those conversations have some sort of meaning and a narrative that strives to go forwards is really impressive, and I think that's what I like about it, despite the fact that I don't necessarily agree with the storytelling. Or not agree, but like it wouldn't be my chosen way of telling a story.
I think it's important for me to say I don't think they're bad books, like, at all, because you don't get to be part of the like lexicon of taught literature without having some value. But I don't know, some stuff that is set in period, as we would now call it, is really interesting to me, and I think it depends on things like the war that it's set to. Like I absolutely adore Hamilton. And I think it's because the American War for Independence is a bit more spicy, for lack of a better term. But
I'm spicier than the Napoleonic War.
At least on this bit, on like the home fronty bit.
Okay.
Like the actual Napoleonic War, very interesting. The bumming around in Kent and being a bit of a waif, less interesting to me. But that doesn't mean people can't love it. I know plenty of people, present company often included, who think, superheroes glaring at each other for 2 hours is getting a bit old. Or in some cases was shit to start with. But
yeah,
everyone likes different things, and that's lovely.
Yeah, it's they both have their merits. I'll give you that. I think it depends where you tell the story from, because I suspect if you told a story from something that was happening in England at the same time as the events of Hamilton, you sort of wouldn't necessarily get them firsthand either, would you? As you said, on the home front or not on the home front, it's sort of wherever the action is. And this is very much not, Austen stuff is not where the action happens.
No,
that's almost the point, isn't it?
I do
appreciate that.
I do live with this constant fear that possibly I'm an ignoramus. I mean, often I know that I am, but I do, and it's something that I think if you're going to talk about literature, you have to be comfortable discussing this idea that maybe I don't like a lot of stuff that is considered worthy because I don't get it or because I don't have refined enough taste for it. But then I think also being comfortable with the fact that you don't have to like everything that is good, and you can like stuff that is bad, and being able to know that just because 99% of the world like it, it doesn't mean you will. I think that's quite an important skill.
Definitely, yeah. And it's oftentimes what the established canon is just what a bunch of old white dudes have said is the best of literature.
And as young white dudes, we don't agree with them.
But people can think whatever they want about the books. Just because I don't think it necessarily does imply inherent value being a part of the canonical texts, as Pride and Prejudice sort of is. So then, as you say, it's sort of about just making your own judgment about it, and I've expressed that I think there are some bits about Jane Austen books that I don't particularly enjoy, such as the endings. And that's fine, as you say, being comfortable saying what you think about a book is important, especially when you're coming at it from
without liking it. Yeah,
exactly. And especially if you're coming at it from a writing point of view, take what you like from this shit. Don't take what you don't like, for sure. Is where I'm at with it in my head. Because I also wouldn't write like Hunter S. Thompson like we did last week. Largely because I don't want to do that to my brain. But yeah, no, it's a fascinating thing to engage with old books and think about what's useful now and what's still good storytelling and what's bad and what you don't like about it as well. Just as important as the good.
Nah, 2 out of 10 shit.
Well, I think if we either of us take anything from it, then we've won. If there is a winning and losing, and I think there's plenty to be taken for both of us here. I really enjoyed your story, and in the end, I enjoyed writing my story. But it took a long time, and then obviously, as I say, I got to a point where I'd written an ending, and I was like, it doesn't feel right. It just way too edgy, unnecessary. Imagine imagine writing a story as an homage to Jane Austen, and putting a sexual assault at the end of it as the ending. It's just not. Yeah, it's just not on. Yeah. So I sort of sat with it for a little while, and I was like, no, this needs to be it needs to be a good ending. And so I started looking at her endings, and I've got to say, not to call Jane Austen out or anything, but they're proper shite. They are really poor. There's something flat and sort of empty about them.
Oh no.
Which I think sort of it does speak to how complicated the stories are, because sooner or later you've got to find a way to tie it all together, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I take the final paragraph of Pride and Prejudice, I've got it in front of me here. It reads simply, and you'll notice some writing modelling that I did for my ending paragraph as well here.
Mm-hmm.
With the Gardiners, they were always on the most intimate terms. Darcy, as well as Elizabeth, really loved them, and they were both ever sensible of the warmest gratitude towards the persons who, by bringing her into Derbyshire, had been the means of uniting them. And that's the end of that book.
That is the longest way anyone's ever said, and they all lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Like we
Oh yeah,
with the story of the gardeners and everything like that. Like it all makes perfect sense. But like, there's no oomph to that. You don't close the book and go, wow.
holy shit! They were
Yeah.
friends with the gardeners.
No, the gardeners are the
It's a family, yeah.
It's our aunt and uncle, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I don't mean the people who do the gardening. We were thinking about putting a bed of tulips over there.
We really do love you, you know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darcy. We'd love to be paid if that's possible.
You have my warmest gratitude towards you, the persons who brought us to Derbyshire.
About that, you said you give us petrol money. We've had nothing. Horse petrol, of course, is what I'm referring to.
Horse petrol?
I know some people would rather call it hay, but I say they're cowards.
I thought you were going to go down the ginger up the arse trick again. That's more like horse nitrous, isn't it?
Yeah.
God,
That's what Dominic Toretto does to him.
It's all about family. As he's like up to his elbow.
I'm most grateful to my family.
Oh, Fast and the Furious with carriages. It'd be amazing.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like the third one, doesn't it? Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Fast and Furious.
Then they got the spin-off for Emma.
Oh, Hobbs and Shaw and Emma. Yeah, I can see it now.
See Emma like choke slamming the Rock through a window or something.
Emma also has it in her contract that she can't lose a fight.
Oh, right. I've really enjoyed this. Let's wrap it up, I think, for next time.
I'd say so. Once again, if you guys want to join in, it is between 800 and 1500 words on the prompt Fragment in the style of Jane Austen. Feel free to tweet at us or email us at thetinybookcase@gmail.com and let us know what you've written. We'd genuinely love to read it.
Thanks a lot, Story Seekers. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?